Our rules are simple, but the challenge is great. No shoulder pets, tames that can be carried, or typical boss dinos allowed. That means no Rexes, Therazinos, or any other dinos people normally use in these fights. Equipped with level 150 saddles across the board, our 19 contenders will be backed by the commanding presence of a loyal Uteranus providing that extra boost. No Overseer because the movement speed required to get through the tech cave, then chase the Overseer during the fight would shorten our list by a lot. It's important to note that tames in this series aren't typically used during boss battles because of the amount of mutations you need to make them competitive, but all of the dinos competing will have around 23,000 health and 1200% melee. This will give them all a fair shot at defeating at least one of the Guardians. It won't always be feasible to reach these stats depending on the dinos we're using, but I'll let you know the amount of mutations and levels it took in order to get there. You can make the call on if the juice is worth the squeeze based off whatever server settings you're using. A passing score is earned if the dino emerges victorious in the boss battle, showcasing its prowess. A failing score doesn't imply that the dino lacks the potential to triumph. It simply means that at this stage, it may not be the most practical choice. Now let's take a look at our competitor and get into the battles. The Beelzebufo, or Devil Frog, is a tame that probably needs no introduction. Found in the swamp ridges of the map, this tongue-slinging badass is typically utilized to gather absurd amounts of cementing paste in the swamp cave. They are excellent swimmers and cover ground very quickly with their epic hopping abilities. This awesome frog is rarely used outside of the previous mentioned scenario, which would be a crime because they're awesome little dudes that deserve your love. Unfortunately, they have a low health gain per level, and there's a reason the Ribbit Mafia isn't typically used in boss battles or outside the swamp cave, and that's because you'll need a whopping 62 mutations and 80 levels. This is an obscene amount of breeding, but the frogs need a fair shot, so let's get after it. With the green portal activated, it was time to hop into the Gamma Broodmother arena. The frogs move quickly and it's relatively easy to surround the Broodmother right off the bat, but as you'll notice, we have a familiar situation that we experienced when we did the Carno video. Some folks have commented that the bosses ignore fighters because of their low drag weight, but the Carnos were ignored with a 250 drag weight and Ankies were not ignored with a 180 drag weight, so I think it may be a different factor. I figured this would happen in this fight, so I brought a Yudi with higher health than I used before, sacrificing stamina, and I hoped he could tank a bit in the later fights. All in all, Gamma Broodmother was an easy pass for the Frog Squad. Gamma Megapithecus took a frustrating amount of time to get down to us, but when he did, it was pretty easy. DPS for the frogs is pretty steady, however it's on the low end. One positive note is their tongues give them some range, so frogs not attacking because they're not right next to the hitbox was less of a problem. A little bit of dipping, ducking, and dodging was all it took, and eventually our amphibian friends took the big man down and earned us another pass. With Gamma Dragon up next, I fully expected him to toss a wrench into my plans as usual, but I remembered my training. He was hot on my heels right away, so I figured I'd need to call an audible to see if this fight was winnable. I was down to half health relatively quickly, and it was about to be a replay of our Carno fight if I didn't act fast, so I leapt off the Yudi recklessly and took a few bites before I hopped onto a frog. I had to watch Commander Utes get destroyed, but we had a trick up our sleeves that we learned during the Dire Bear fight. In case you didn't see it, if you use small creatures that can cluster around the dragon's feet, then they're untouchable by his attacks for the most part. One problem I saw is that we would take a shot of flame breath while engaging after he lands every time. But fortunately, the Gamma boss is easy and we scored another pass. Heading into the Beta Broodmother fight, I knew I'd have to either play extreme dodgeball with the webs in this fight, or I'd have to do some tanking. First, I tried running laps around the arena, and eventually I had to resort to tanking a little bit. I was able to withstand the damage fairly well, but I knew going into the alpha fight later on that we'd be in some serious trouble. The frog is one of my favorite tames in Ark, but they're just not built for this. Their damage output is unfortunately too low even with all the mutations and levels we pumped into these guys. It may be low, but for the Beta Broodmother it was enough, and the Frog Squad cranked out another win. As we fired up the battle with our favorite gorilla, I kept with the same strategy I had with the Broodmother. Taking shots from this guy wasn't that bad, but again, I knew we'd struggle with the alpha bosses. The Megapithecus fight is always just a battle for correct position. You want to minimize damage to your tames and dodge boulder throws all while trying not to get close to the inner edge where you can get knocked off the map and die. Constantly being on the move helps in this fight because you can draw the attacks evenly amongst your tames, all while taking minimal damage from the slow-moving minions that the Megapithecus summons. Once I knew we had it in the bag, I stood strong and let the frogs go to work, earning us another pass. There was no way in hell we were going to beat the Beta Dragon. The entire crew took a shot of flame right off the bat, and positioning was a little wonky. We were actually dishing out a lot of damage at first, and the beta dragon was down to a quarter of his health pretty early on. We had him surrounded and pinned down for a hot minute, but it wasn't meant to last, and he soon took to the skies. On his second landing, we got up under his tank and started hammering him down to about 50% health before Commander Utes had to be abandoned. I did it much more carefully this time and didn't take any damage. We watched our Ute burn to death and had to reposition after he took off. The whole team took a big shot of flame when we moved in to continue tongue-punching his fart box. Once we got a good foothold, the crew went to town, slurping on them dragon toes, and slowly started to whittle him down. Keep in mind, this isn't even the alpha dragon yet, and we lost about half of our force. But in the end, it's all we needed, and miraculously pulled off a win against the beta dragon. Small tames crowded around the feet proves to be effective again, and the frogs get another pass. I had a terrible feeling going into this fight because I wanted the Ribbit Kings and Queens to win. But the Broodmother hits hard, and before we barely even damaged her, I had to abandon Commander Utes. I was able to time my transfer to one of the frogs perfectly and started licking like my life depended on it. Once again, we had to watch as our trusty Uranus fell in battle. We wouldn't have the benefit of hiding under the boss to dish out damage in this fight, like we do with the dragon, and the Broodmother laid it on thick with no remorse. We lost one frog after another frog, and this battle proved to be hopeless, so we had to notch our first fail of the night on the board. With the red portal up, we waited patiently before hopping into the Alpha Megapithecus arena. At first, it was nothing short of horrifying. He hit super hard, and there was chaos all over the place with tongues and rocks flying every which way. I'd be lying if I didn't say I had my doubts at first, but we played a little ring around the rosy before a semicircle wall of frogs was able to block his way as he was aggroed on me. We kept this up for a while and got his health down pretty low before having to reposition. Seriously, trapping him like this was super effective, as long as you're out of range from his melee attack. After a little more running circles around the arena, I was able to do it again after he broke free. The frogs were relentless, and they were able to hammer it home and score a miracle pass against an alpha boss. The final fight of the night against the alpha dragon was actually one of the strangest boss fights I've ever had. It was a complete slaughter at first, and it should have been over within a couple minutes because we were extremely outgunned. No matter which way I positioned myself, I just couldn't get the Uranus out of harm's way. Eventually I had to abandon Chip after a constant roasting and fortunately made it to one of the frogs. I downed a ton of healing brews because I almost got cooked myself, and then I utilized the toad licking strategy. For the most part, it kept the frogs unscathed, but of course, all good things come to an end and we had to endure a barrage of fire every single time the dragon landed. The hits just kept on coming, and we lost a lot of frogs, but surprisingly, we were able to put a pretty significant dent in the alpha dragon's health pool. The AI movement in this game is honestly not even worthy of being considered mid-tier. If you're able to figure out a way to successfully maneuver the bulk of your army away from the initial fire breath after a landing, then you could probably beat the alpha dragon with some surprising tames. Having more than one person in this fight, with one being the bait while the other controls the bulk force, then I'd call that a winning plan. Eventually, the dragon stopped taking off, and it just kind of ran away from us. Not to be deterred, my remaining 5 frogs charged back into battle, and we got into taint punching mode rather quickly. This is where it gets a little bit weird. If you take a look at the frog under the heel of the dragon, you'll notice that he's not taking any damage, and he just kind of dies for no reason. This is actually how my last few frogs die. The one I was riding wasn't losing any health while I was on him, but all the other frogs at the end literally just kicked the bucket. I surprisingly got the dragon down to a sliver of health, but it didn't feel right. I actually dismounted this frog and he died the same way, for no reason. I smacked him with my hatchet a few times and decided to sacrifice myself in honor of the brave frogs we lost, earning our last fail. 5 down and tons to go, my friends. I have a lot of things planned for you, such as mammoths, kentros, berries, calicos, stegos, and many more. If you've enjoyed this series, please like and subscribe and hit me up in the comments because I enjoy interacting with everyone. Feedback is always welcome and I greatly appreciate everyone's support. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one.